it's Debbie coming at you with a wreath. Everything from the Dollar Tree. Here are the materials we'll use to make our little wreath. We have the little green styrofoam wreath form from Dollar Tree, the mini pine cones, jute twine, an owl ornament, some frosty branch picks, an infinity scarf, some ribbon, and a couple of floral picks. So we'll put all that together along with some wire or pipe cleaners and hot glue. Okay, so we're going to start by covering our wreath form with our infinity scarf. I took the infinity scarf and I cut the seam, and then that gave me a long strip of fabric, and I cut that strip of fabric in half, and we're going to wrap this around the wreath. So using hot glue, we'll use a little bit of hot glue right on the wreath form, and then we'll start wrapping. It's like a polar fleece, I guess, type fabric. So we'll wrap it, keep it neat, and when you cut this, just use a pair of good sharp scissors so you get a nice straight cut. I always say at school, we don't want our work to look like the dog chewed it out. So, you know, take a second and make it look neat on the cutting. You'll just get a better finished product. So you're gonna wrap this all the way around, overlapping. And so I chose this one that has kind of a beige and white, kind of like a houndstooth pattern. It's not kind of like a houndstooth, it is a houndstooth. So I'm making a wreath that maybe is a little bit more winter and not so much Christmas. So maybe we could leave it up into January. So you'll just continue wrapping. Okay, so here's our wreath all covered with our fabric that used to be an infinity scarf, covered, glued down, nice and even. You're gonna have a seam like where you started, where you finished, but they really won't show. And if it bothers you, like you could just say, okay, I gotta put my bow there. But once we do the next step, it won't really show that much. So we're gonna wrap some jute twine around this just to give it another layer. So I'm just gonna flip this over to what I'm calling the back of my wreath, the side that looks the least good. I'm gonna flip it around, and then I'm just gonna wrap this right around. So like where I have the end, that'll just kind of seal it down a little bit. Wrapping it around, keeping a consistent angle. There's probably a better way to do this. In this long tail, I could maybe roll that up or something. So you'll just wrap around, all the way around until you get back. Okay, ready to make the pretty part. So I took some Dollar Tree picks and I dismantled them. I took the willow branch that has little ice crystals and clipped a couple off. I'm gonna start with those. I'm kind of making an L shape, and right here's the seam where I started and ended. So I'm gonna use that like for where I start my design, to cover as much of that up as possible. So I'm hot gluing a couple of these branches in place, and then I will probably also, just because I like things to be, you know, attached structurally, I'll take a tiny little bit of wire and go around there once or twice, and that will be hidden by the other greenery we'll put on here. So just know that I always like to put a little piece of wire or a pipe cleaner around anything I'm putting on there. I don't really love to rely on glue exclusively. You know, sometimes glue is just unreliable. It looks like it's stuck for a minute, but then it gets too hot or it gets too cold, or I don't know, it just changes its mind and then everything falls apart. So I think glue plus wire, anytime you can, is a better way to live your crafty life. Okay, I made a bow, and I made a bow tutorial a few videos back. So this is just the same bow that I made in that video. I used red in the back and then the burlap and the red and burlap. I'm kind of doing a red-ish theme on this. And I'm gonna put that right there, kind of where those two branches met in the corner, and I've got the wire that's holding my bow together, and that is how I will attach the bow to the wreath form. Twist it down in the back, trim off the excess wire. So there's my bow, and I can kind of turn that around so it faces the right way. So I kind of have like the neutral base. I've got like the beige and the white and the burlap, all the neutrals. Okay, then I'm gonna stick this frosty fern in there. A little hot glue, kind of shove it under the bow, hold it in place. Again, you can go back in there and add a wire or a pipe cleaner for good measure. Here's another hunk of frosty fern, and I'll slide that under the bow, going that way. So it's kind of overlapping. I like to layer things on a wreath, not to just have everything just one layer, but add dimension. This is a small wreath, so we're not going to add a ton, but we can still give it some personality. Then I've got my pine. Maybe I'll put a little pine. I'm going to put a little pine, just a glob of glue. I also might change this. Sometimes I'll make something and then I look at it for a day and I'm like, ooh, I want to change that. So you can always take something apart. Like nothing in the craft life is permanent. Well, I'm sure there's something permanent. But for the most part, like stuff like this, if you don't love it, just take that glue off and redo it. Don't, I guess, don't settle for what you don't want. That's a good that's in like life or crafts. Don't settle. Okay, so I've got all that. Now I've got a holly leaf and I've got some red berries. That's a lot of berries. I feel like I don't want to use all those berries. I think if I plunk that giant red berry in there, it's too much. So I'm gonna come in here and snip off some red berries. And I might even, I'm gonna stick those in my bow. I'm just composing as I go. So I'm gonna stick that in my bow right there. And then grab another one and go the other direction with it. Sometimes, these little berries, they're styrofoam. They're not very durable. Sometimes they get a little bit beat up, and I don't love it when that happens. Just kind of wanted to droop a little. There we go. So there's our wreath. You could put some pine cones in here. I'm gonna grab a couple of my tiny pine cones. My main gripe with these is the cinnamon smell. Whew. They are strong. If you leave them in the car overnight, oh my goodness. Oh, you don't leave things in the car overnight? Okay. I do all the time. Sometimes when I get home, I'm just too exhausted to drag all that stuff in. So I'll stick our pine cones in there. Woo, Mama burned her finger. There we go. Do I like that? Why, yes, as a matter of fact, I do. And so the last thing we're gonna add is the owl. This is a Dollar Tree owl. He's got little plastic pine cones, which are coming unstuck. I mean, it was $1. I think these are absolutely adorable. There are 3 different varieties of these little owls, and they were in my Dollar Trees a couple of weeks ago. I checked yesterday, and my home Dollar Tree is out. So this has these little pine cone feet on it, which, depending on how you attach it or where you sit it, you might want to get rid of them. I'm going to sit this little guy right behind the bow right there. So these pine cone feet need to go. They'll keep him from sitting the way I want him to sit. So I've got him like this. I'm going to put a bunch of glue, sorry guy, right on his little tail. I'm going to stand this up in front of myself so I can see what it'll look like hanging, so I can get him kind of positioned how I want him. I want him to kind of sit straight up in the middle of the wreath. So I'm holding him up like that. Now, that's where he's gonna sit, that's where he's gonna be, but look at the back. The back, there's a little gap where his where his feet kind of were. So I need to put something in that gap to prop him up, and I'm just going to use one of the pine cones, maybe 2 of the pine cones, to make a little prop under his feet. So just a pine cone. You won't see this. It's just going to sit like underneath him to prop him up. I don't know if you can see that or not, but right there, kind of underneath where his feet used to be. His feet were kind of positioned to the front. So if we put that little pine cone under there to hold him in place, it'll just keep him sitting up nice and straight when we hang him. There you go.